Tonight is Monday, July 24th, 2017. It is 7 o'clock p.m. This is the regular city council meeting for the city of St. Peter. We will call the meeting to order. Would all please join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Everyone should have a copy of the agenda in front of them. Are there any changes to the agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of the agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Next, we have the minutes of our July 10th, 2017 meeting. Those minutes appear on pages 4 through 7. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? If not, is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All those in favor of the minutes as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. First up tonight, we have a public hearing for a tax increment financing district. And Todd, if you want to go over the rules and regulations.
I will go over the rules just quickly. First of all, Mayor and members, generally the order of the hearing goes like this. We have a staff presentation to identify the issues related to the hearing and provide some background material. The applicant then has an opportunity to provide facts or information. In some cases, we have an applicant. In some cases, that applicant was the city itself. And then we receive public comment. Our goal is to help ensure that speakers are limited to 5 minutes and that they stick to the facts. They should know that the council is unlikely to engage in a back and forth with them. This is really an opportunity to provide information and evidence to the council. And after all the evidence and testimony, the mayor has the opportunity to close the hearing. If there's action to be taken, as there is at times in certain city council meetings, we have action that same night. Sometimes the action is at a following meeting a couple of weeks down the road. And trying to think if those are the big ones. I think those are the big ones for tonight. So we'll turn it over to Shannon, who does the work for us on tax and refinancing district. Shannon.
No. First of all, we're going to open this public hearing at 7:04 p.m. on Monday, July 24th, 2017. And now, Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Shannon Sweeney with David Drown Associates here to briefly present some basic information on the action item that's before the council following the public hearing. We have a resolution in your packet that ultimately creates a tax increment financing district. What that means is we're intending to capture city, county, and a little bit of school property tax from a specific piece of property in the community for a period of up to 26 years. This is a housing tax increment district, which has a maximum duration under state statute of 26 years of collection. And so we're intending to do that. We have a specific project. We also have a development agreement in your packet for that project called Solace Apartments. And we're intending to provide a subsidy over that same 26 period of capture by reimbursing 90% of the tax increments that are generated as a result of that project. To be clear, we're not going backwards in tax base as a community. We're not reducing the tax base, but we are foregoing the benefit of the tax base being created by this project for an extended period of time. And the housing tax increment district enables us to do that. I think as we understand, there are income restrictions imposed, both self-imposed by the project and imposed by the use of tax increment financing. We have two choices. 20% of the units have to be occupied by families below 50% of area median income, or 40% have to be occupied, 40% of the units, that is, have to be occupied by families at or below 60% of area median income. To this point, the Housing Partnership has indicated it's their intention that 100% of the units are going to be occupied by families at or below 60% of area median income. And so we don't see any problem with them meeting that requirement. They will have to certify to the city annually that they are meeting that requirement as part of our compliance with TIF statute. The estimated annual reimbursement based on the estimated market value of the project is $26,901 in property tax that we would capture and reimburse to them on an annual basis. Again, in a project like this, we look at it as a cash flow subsidy, in that in order to exist and offer these units to folks at lower than average incomes, we have to be able to assist them in meeting cash flow requirements, and that means a reduction in property taxes being paid. And so we're doing that for a long duration while they get their debt paid down, and hopefully at the end of the duration of this TIF district, they'll be able to contribute to our property tax base, have debt paid off, and continue to operate the project in a similar manner. So, development agreement provides specific terms with regard to the tax increment assistance. Essentially, they have to construct the project in a reasonable time frame. They have to certify annually that they're meeting the income restrictions, and for that, they'll receive that 90% reimbursement. The resolution in your packet that you're going to be asked to act upon following the public hearing authorizes execution of that agreement, just so we're clear. The tax increment district itself establishes budget, boundaries, a budget for the project that's based on the projected collection. We do increase that a little bit in case there's an amendment to the project, so you don't have to hire us to come back again and redo it. We don't want to tightly define it within the budget. We do want to tightly define it within the development agreement, however, which I think we've done. And so we have a budget, we have a project area that's established that they're proposing to purchase in order to construct the project. And we have a timeline that we intend to capture property taxes under, also established within that TIF plan. So with that, I'm more than happy to answer your questions with regard to the tool that we're talking about putting into place.
Steve?
Mr. Sweeney, you said the statutory limit's 26 years.
Yes.
Is that an automatic in our end that we always go 26 years, or can we go 10 years?
We almost never go 26 years.
Right.
I would call this a different project, though, in that there are lots of deep subsidies going into the construction of this project, so it's available to folks that are well below the incomes that we normally support with our projects.
So what are you saying? Is it going to go 15 years or is it going to go 26?
The development agreement provides 26 years of assistance, which means the district would last that long.
Okay, all right.
Roger?
You said it's to pay back, to help them so they could pay back the debt. And I don't know, you said something along those lines.
No, it's a cash flow subsidy in order to be able to operate efficiently enough to be able to offer these units at very low cost to the folks that are going to be renting.
So it's not tied to that, because I thought you said something about that. But it's to help maintain operational costs as well.
I would say it's mostly about that, and it's the sole reason they were able to get the funding that they were able to access to do this project was that the city essentially provided an early commitment to providing tax increment assistance, which scored more points on an application to the state of Minnesota, which provided an even deeper subsidy for the project. And it's that commitment that we're following through on.
Yeah. We're very interested in this type of a project. I was on the board for it, and I want to see this succeed as well. But,
Understood.
just when you said that, that's
Yeah.
Shannon, the TIF dollars, when you say it's for cash flow, it flows in, gets involved in cash flow because they don't have to expend dollars for their development at this point. None of these dollars go to paying off any construction costs. It's all for infrastructure and pavement and these types of things, so
Yeah.
people know that.
The tool requires us to tie it to specific improvements, but at the end of the day, what we're really doing is reducing their operating costs so that they can have lower rents. And, to me, that's how I simply view the tool that we're applying in this instance, so.
But if I could add, it is accurate to say that the TIF rules provide for, they have to expend certain dollars in certain categories. We can't really use these dollars to buy napkins for a event or anything like that.
No.
It's tied to very specific things related to the development of the property.
It is, and they're required, to construct this to a high level of construction, and we are tying our assistance to specific improvements that are part of that construction, mostly site work and, at grade or below improvements as required by statute.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's not upfront assistance. We're not writing a large check to the developer. We're simply reimbursing taxes that they pay over time, and if they don't meet their end of the bargain, we can cancel the contract, which is a very safe investment for us to make because we haven't provided a ton of upfront assistance that we can't claw back at some point, so.
Okay. Roger?
I guess, and I didn't see it in here, but maybe it is. Is there anything in here where at least I'll speak for myself, and when we voted previously, we don't have interest in making this a low-income housing project. It has a very specific goal. Is that in here to last that 26 years? And if it doesn't, if it turns into a low housing project, do they lose the TIF?
We do not have requirements in the development agreement at this time with regard to the, specific services to be provided or the manner in which they operate. If we want to impose restrictions like that, we should amend the draft we have because it doesn't cover that issue. Right now, all it says is that they have to construct the project and they have to operate it where at least 40% of the units are occupied by families below 60% of area median income. So if we need to have further restrictions, we would need to amend the document that you have before you.
If I can add, we do have a zoning that provides for the type of use that they contemplate. If they go away from that use, they can no longer use that land use in that manner. So let me be more specific about that. The land use that is allowed for, that is not part of a conditional use or any other type of condition that's provided, means that there has to be services provided. That's what's allowed within that zone. If they do not provide that, if it just turns into an apartment building, they'll be out of compliance with their zoning. And my position as the city administrator would be is that then the contract would be terminated because they're using it outside of the rules of the city of St. Peter, outside of your land use rules.
Does that protect us sufficiently to make sure it stays to be the project that we
I think it
want?
protects you very reasonably.
And the land use, is that tied to what Solus project is intended? Or does land use only speak of apartment buildings or low income?
The land use, and forgive me for not having the exact language, Russ may know the exact language. Russ, do you know the exact language? Would you mind articulating that?
Although the project would meet the guidelines of a housing TIF district, it is not considered multifamily housing. This use is being permitted as guidance services. So it's imperative and it's required that they have those services, the treatment services, the parenting treatment, the life cycle treatment. If those go away, they could not vacate and then just put it in paper and get people to move in. It is not zoned for multifamily residential, but it is zoned, and guidance services is a permitted use within that business park district. So,
Within your development agreement, if they're not using the property appropriately within your rules, that's basis for termination of the agreement.
Right, it's just, we're signing on for 26 years
Yeah.
in this, so that's why I'm,
Oh, no, it's a fair
Really?
question. It's a very fair question. This is a long-term deal and something that you've worked on for a couple of years plus, I think. Maybe it's longer than that, but it's been a few years.
4 votes.
Yeah.
Any more questions for Shannon? Coming up under new business, it's our first item A, and maybe at that time, I see Mr. Gudeman is here from Southwest Minnesota Housing. Maybe he can, for the public, I guess, and us, give us an overview of the project, just a brief one at that point in time. That would help, I think, people that are viewing to know what we're doing here when we refer to low-income housing. So, all right. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
Is there anyone that would like to speak on this open, or on this public hearing in opposition of the appellant? Seeing no one, we will close this public hearing at 7:15 p.m. Next up, we have visitors. We will address anyone in the audience that would like to speak on any agenda item. Seeing no one, Next, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any matter whatsoever? If you would like to at this time, please come forward. State your name, home address, and we'll give you about 5 minutes, if you need them.
Well, good evening, Council and Mr. Mayor. My name is Emily Bruflat, and this is my husband, Nathan Coster. We live at 317 Grace Street, just down the street from here, and we're here to talk to you about bees.
Emily, if I could, I know some people, but could you speak up? I mean, your microphone is picking it up, but, you know,
Sure,
it should carry a little bit more.
Sure,
if
I
you
can
would.
talk a little louder. You want me to say all that again?
No, you're fine.
Okay, we can talk louder. I'm going to turn it over to him now anyway.
Oh, okay.
And he's really loud.
Good evening, everyone. We've been in St. Peter for coming up on about a year now. And basically, we would like to keep bees, and it's come to our attention that that is in violation of a current city ordinance. And so we're here to kind of discuss that and hopefully affect some change. Just for some brief personal history, before I moved out to Minnesota, I lived in Washington State. And while in Washington, I took a few courses on being a beekeeper. I have some minor, certifications. I was registered with Washington State. So by no means do I claim to be an expert, but I have some experience and some idea of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So my understanding is the current issue is that bees are categorized as a farm animal under city ordinances. I find that peculiar maybe, so if anyone could provide an understanding of what the thought process was behind that, I could potentially more directly address that. Otherwise, I guess I can just give a general perspective on
Okay.
why I think we should keep bees.
Why don't you give a general perspective? That would
Sure.
be the way to go, I think.
So basically, we feel like bees are an asset to the community. I'm not aware of any particular argument against that. Driving around, I would say probably 30 to 50% of the yards we go past have gardens of some sort.
Yeah, a lot of gardens.
Our garden in particular certainly seems to have benefited from bees. We're doing pretty well this year. So bees have a travel radius of approximately 2 miles, and given where we're situated, our bees potentially cover all of St. Peter, so that's kind of nice. We're not looking to do anything particularly commercial with them. It's just for our benefit, community benefit. Thoughts, comments, anything else?
Todd, if you want to cover something.
Well, I think you're correct. It is listed as a farm animal within our ordinance. I can't necessarily speak to why, but I think you might find in most Minnesota cities it was done that way. And it's more history and traditional, but there are many communities that are changing.
Sure, and I actually did look, I believe it was the University of Minnesota list, and you're right, they had many cities, and some of them have them listed as farm animals, some of them specifically don't have them as farm animals, some of them have them as farm animals, but they are specifically excluded, so it
Yeah.
seems to be all over the place.
Not to change animals on you, but there's always many ways to skin a cat.
Sure.
And so there are many different ways that cities handle that. It is certainly something that the council can discuss. It hasn't been that long since they modified that same ordinance relative to chickens. And so it is certainly something that the council can talk about if they would like.
Yeah, and whether so it's been suggested that perhaps we could specifically get a permit or some kind of exclusion, whether that's an approach or whether we want to modify the ordinance in general and open it up for anyone. I guess we're kind of open, but the bottom line is we would like to keep bees and we would like to do it correctly.
At this point, my understanding would be we'd have to change the ordinance. I don't think we can do a variance just for, I suppose we could do anything, but I don't anticipate us doing that.
And it would be my preference. to
My
make it-
my question is, you say they cover 2 miles. How many bees do you anticipate having?
So right now we have a hive, which is how we came to learn that it was in violation of an ordinance. During the busy part of the year, a single hive has upwards of 100,000 bees in it, and then over winter, that hive decreases substantially.
Like 30,000 or something.
Yeah, it's in the tens of thousands. So rather than measuring bees, it's more, I guess, efficient to measure hives. Personally, I think we would like to have maybe 2 hives. You generally want to have more than one because the survival rate of any given hive, even if you're doing things in an ideal way, is fairly low. It's like 50-50 or maybe 30%. So if you have multiples, then it's easier to keep track of what's going on, and you have a greater chance of the bees succeeding in general. But yeah, I don't think we have any interest in having more than
Okay.
2
But,
or 3.
question, when you were out in Washington, how big of a property did you have there that you? kept
I
these
was
in?
on I believe it was, I want to say it was a 3rd acre. It was a weird parcel. And we had 3 hives, 2 in front of the garage and 1 behind the garage.
So you were in a municipality then? Or
Yeah,
you
we were technically right outside city limits. We were in
Okay.
a growth area, I believe.
And
is
right
what it
now,
was.
your property is,
We are middle of downtown.
right? Right. A concern that I have, and I don't know if it's valid or not, you know, some people are allergic to bees.
Sure.
And I'm just wondering if surrounding neighbors and, you know, would be more, you know, as far as what would happen, you know, if
Generally
influx of
speaking,
bees.
Generally speaking, bees, honeybees, unlike like wasp or other things that aren't bees, honeybees are very, very non-aggressive, very private. You're really only at risk of getting stung if you are actively interfering with a bee or interfering with the hive. And even interfering with the bee, stinging you is a choice of last resort because it will kill the bee. So as far as anyone being at risk, it should be incredibly minimal. I mean, they would pretty much literally have to be intentionally interfering with the
And
hive.
some kids, well, with the hive, but some kids could,
Sure.
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
bees.
We do have a,
I'm
we
not-
have a little chicken wire fence blocking people
Right.
from walking up to it and
Sure.
everything.
You can't
You
accidentally
Right.
stumble. into
Right.
it.
No, you
Right.
can't do that.
Okay.
Well, and even just to that, like, I grew up being very afraid of all things bee wasp. I had no idea the difference and anything like that. I've learned a ton from this project about just that it's okay. Like, they're not going to hurt me. I've been close to it, and that's a little exhilarating for me as someone who kind of grew up watching my dad like spray a wasp nest and then run.
Right.
And and we have wasps at our house too, and I'm still kind of intimidated by them. But the bees really, they just want their flowers, and that's it.
Okay, anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, we'll,
I have one
Yeah.
or 2 comments,
yeah,
if you
go
don't
ahead.
mind.
Sure.
The first thing I'd like to address is the number of bees you mentioned. I think you said about 100,000 in a typical hive. That number might sound alarming to a lot of people. 100,000 is a really big number.
Sure.
But I think it's important to put that into some sort of perspective. Relatively speaking, 100,000 is actually very few bees compared to what already exist naturally within the city. And certainly as you go towards the wild areas around the edges, you're looking at orders of magnitude more. So on the one hand, while it might seem huge to be adding 100,000 bees into the neighborhood, the reality of there being millions and millions of insects buzzing around in our neighborhood all the time means that it's not actually a very significant number. I see the value in increasing the number of bees in the community, and it's for the benefit of a lot of people. There's plenty of research that shows that the opportunity for bees to reach into smaller garden plots and isolated areas with flowering plants can do quite a lot for the health of those things. And so actually there are some benefits there, although I realize people are probably more likely to think about the risk of getting stung. The reality is that there's a much greater benefit to those gardens probably than there is risk. Just yesterday, my son was stung by a wasp at a community park, and I personally have never heard of anybody in the area getting stung by a honeybee, but I certainly have heard plenty of stories of kids getting stung by wasps here in St. Peter. So I think it's important to keep those things in perspective.
Steve?
So I have a couple questions. Are you doing it for the honey or for the ecological benefit Or I mean, yeah, what?
Broadly speaking, my answer would be yes. We appreciate getting some honey from the bees. This is the first year this particular hive has existed, so we won't get likely much or any from it. But yes, we would like honey for our use, for sharing with friends and so forth. I would like to try brewing it, actually, into mead. But in addition to that, we believe it's beneficial for our garden. Our neighbors have gardens, the community has gardens, so there's that aspect. And it's also just generally, I guess, good for humanity.
Right.
Uh,
Bees are really endangered right now. I mean, every year, like you said, about half the hives or more die, and it's getting worse and worse because of pesticides and other things that are really strictly endangering honeybees. And so it's an important thing to keep. You know, we want to do something good, you know, and
So our motivation is both, I guess, for
Personal.
personal benefit as
And-
well as just general well-being and so forth.
next
And their
question.
need,
Okay, being that you've lived in the same spot for a year, you said?
just about.
Yep.
Have you talked to your neighbors about your idea?
One in particular, yes.
We've not hidden the bees' presence. We've talked with our neighbors about a variety of things, gardens and so forth. No one has expressed any concern to us directly about the bees. At least one of our neighbors, the one, I guess, most immediately facing the hive,
Next to us, she expressed
Is really
she thought they were
enthusiastic
neat.
about
She
them.
said her brother does beekeeping. I think it was her brother, a relative of hers, and she thought, oh, that's so great. And then nothing else. Like she hasn't expressed any concern or anything.
Having said that, I believe what led to our getting a phone call about the bees was, I believe someone did call the city and complain on some level.
Or just
I
or
don't
just
know
let
who
them
that
know.
was, or-
When we don't know what the conversation was.
Because no one has talked to us about
We
it
don't know if
directly.
it was a complaint or just, hey, we know they're in violation of the ordinance or what. So that's why we're here.
Well, I have two more questions. Is that okay? Nick?
Sure.
I know someone that's a commercial beekeeper on 169 heading north, and they've
Yeah.
got many, many hives in the woods. And have you checked into any property outside the city limits that allow you to get a bigger capacity of bees?
That's kind of our plan B for this particular hive. If we can't figure something out here, then we will be forced to move the hive. And we have talked to basically a friend who has who
Has a
farms
farm.
outside of city limits. And so that's what we'll be doing, is moving the hive.
Okay.
That works as far as this hive being okay. That works as far as us still being able to acquire honey and so forth. But our garden potentially loses the benefit.
The city,
The general
area.
community loses the benefit. And actually, something else that came to mind from one of her comments. As she pointed out, there are going to be bees in town regardless. By providing
A home for them.
a designated place for them, you at least have more, I guess, control or influence over where they at least live, if not are.
And then my final question for the walking and motoring public on Highway 160, or I mean on Grace, motoring meaning myself as an example. Would any of the pedestrians be susceptible to being stung walking on the sidewalk?
Sure. So the way bees work is if you face the hive against like a obstacle, so ours is currently 3
Right.
feet or so away from and facing the garage. When the bees exit the hive, they go up, and once they go up, they go out. So if you put something to basically encourage them to go up, you elevate their path of travel. They are currently sandwiched between a greenhouse that's 8 foot tall, a tree, a garage, and our house. So
They have a little pocket.
without being in our yard and within 5 feet of the hive or so, you're not really likely to directly encounter a bee departing or returning to this hive. And so, no, the foot traffic out on the road, the foot traffic in the alley next to our house should all be
Right.
unaffected.
I just have one, is that one more question, Mr. Mayor?
You said two, but we'll give you three.
Okay, thank you. How close are you to the property line where the beehives are located
The
now?
bees, we basically located centrally, more or less, to our property. So they're probably at least 25, 30 feet from any border of our property.
Okay,
And they're actually, I guess, furthest back from the street. So there's front yard, our house, another 20 feet, and then the beehive.
Good. All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks. Well, Roger?
I agree with Ms. Carlin. I think there's a lot of benefits to it. So
Yeah.
I'd like us to visit it.
Yeah, we'll revisit it, and no doubt about that. We will take it up. I want to thank both of you for coming forward and trying to be in compliance, and, that speaks a lot. So,
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your time.
But just so you know that our discussion on chickens occupied us for 7 months.
yeah.
Fair enough.
In the meantime, then, what should I tell the police station? They wanted me to keep them informed as far as a timeline so that,
What activities?
right, because if we have to move the hive, that's sort of a last resort, because right now it's really heavy, for one thing, because it's full of honey. And we want to make sure that we keep them informed so that they know what we're
Up to.
up to.
Todd will take care of that one
Okay.
for you.
Yeah. I'll get your number from Janet, and I'll visit with her, and then
Yes, she's
we'll
the one that
contact you.
okay, she's the one that I talked to.
Yep.
So, okay.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else in the audience like to speak to the council on any item whatsoever? We will move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda begins in detail on page 10 and concludes with the resolution on page 30, and includes the following budgeted purchases in excess of $7,500 to Wetland Bank Administration for Hallett's Pond wetland credits for $8,650, to B&B Commercial Coating for hydrant painting for $9,500, to Geldner Underground for directional boring for $8,710. The following individuals are appointed as election judges for 2017. There are 43 of them. We will not read every one. The following employee appointment is hereby approved at a wage of $9.50 per hour to Maria Correr for part-time circulation clerk, and plus the regular schedule of disbursements for July 6, 2017 through July 19, 2017. Are there any questions or comments about the consent agenda? John?
Todd, I have one question about the hydrants. We're doing 100 of them. We've done 3 years already. We've done 300. We'll now have done 400. How many hydrants we have?
I'll get you an answer. I don't know that one off the top of my head.
But the intention is, when we get through all of them, we'll be ready to start over again, or then there'll be a gap?
My belief is, my recollection is that this will kind of be an ongoing process, depending on how they hold up,
So-
weather impacts it.
So we took the anticipated life expectancy of the paint and divided by the number of hydrants and came up with 100.
Yes.
Okay.
Steve?
Todd, I have a couple of questions. I don't want to say several. It could be out here all night. But first of all, could you explain to me what is the Westland Bank Administration?
The wetland,
Okay, I could ask, so you want me to keep going on or just?
let's do one at a time, should
All
we?
right, okay.
I'll let your city engineer, Jeff Domrus, explain what the Wetland Bank Administration is.
Okay, thank you. Good question. A wetland bank is basically a bank that private property owners, entities, when they develop wetlands, what they're allowed to do is store the wetland credits in a bank. So a lot of times what developers will do is they'll create a wetland that's larger than what they need, and then after so many years of upkeep, they're able to bank those credits in the Minnesota Wetland Bank. Bowser is the one that maintains that bank and keeps track of how many credits go in and out. So for instance, as a city, our particular, we're looking at buying X amount of acres of wetland to replace what we're impacting with that proposed trail project on the south side of Hallett's Pond. So what we'll do is then withdraw those number of credits from that wetland bank, and there may be more available after that, but it's more of a bank is what it is.
It's a credit trading opportunity through Bowser.
Did you have more, Steve?
Yeah, so how is it that, I think you answered my question in a roundabout way, Jeff, but how is Mike Drummer, why would we buy these credits from him? Why would we pay him?
Yes, as a city, you have a choice. when it comes to wetland impacts. One of them is to do nothing or, avoid the wetland. Another is to utilize wetland credits. Another is to actually generate or build a wetland twice the size of the one that you are filling. So in our particular situation, we're filling so many acres of wetland, and we would have to create twice that number of acres and on a site around town, and then monitor it for 5 years. And then after that 5 years, have the wetland delineated and confirm that we did create the number of credits that were, or the number of acres of wetland that we were required to create. So the benefit of not having to do that is that you don't have to go through that whole process. Somebody's already done it, and you can just buy the credit or what they've already done, a portion of what they've already completed.
So what you're saying is this Mike Drummer has done that, he's created
That's correct.
the wetland. And why do we need to buy these credits for the little bit that we're doing on Hallett's Pond?
Well, Hallett's Pond, there's a diagram, I think, in your packet,
Right,
but
there
there is
is.
the pond, or there's a wetland in the vicinity of the property that the city owns. And so in order to get that trail through there, there's no way of getting the trail through there without filling that wetland or impacting the wetland. So anytime you impact a wetland or fill it, it's required to go through a mitigation, and therefore, that's where we're at right now.
So then my final question, was this established by the DNR or maybe some groups like Ducks Unlimited that had an influence on legislation for our state?
I don't think it had anything to do with Ducks Unlimited. I think it was probably the Wetland Conservation Act in 1990-ish, I think.
Because I know that Ducks Unlimited puts more money into wetland preservation than the state of Minnesota does.
Okay.
I read that, so that's why I was wondering.
Probably a joint effort,
Right.
they help out then.
Okay. All right,
Jerry?
that's all, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, thank you.
We,
Jerry?
we use the purchase of credits for wetland for the road that comes out of the state hospital onto 169.
That is
So it's
correct.
not something new that we're doing.
That is correct, yes.
Susie?
I was just going to add that this practice has been in place for several decades at this point, and it's actually quite a common situation, especially MnDOT runs into this quite a lot when there is a most obvious path of development that cuts through some sort of sensitive wetland area. There was a time in the past when if there's a wetland in the way, you just take a bunch of dirt, fill it in, and build your road. But recognizing that there were negative long-term consequences to that, this practice was created so that when the maybe the best societal choice was to build across a wetland, there was still the chance to replace that with a piece of additional wetland somewhere else. But if you can imagine, the area that we're impacting at Hallett's Pond is quite small. And so if we were to just go out someplace in a spare piece of land and build a miniature wetland the size of what we're impacting at Hallett's, it would not have much value in and of itself. So by having this bank, someone can invest in a much larger project somewhere else, and we each pay in a little bit of money for the little increments that we've impacted in other places, but there's still a quality wetland that's been developed someplace else to mitigate for all those small amounts of damage that happen in other places. Does that help you a little bit with understanding the
Well, I
parameters?
understand the value of wetlands, don't get
Sure,
me wrong, I
sure.
understand that.
Right.
But I'm not familiar with this program, but I understand what the act that you're talking about, Jeff, I've heard of that back in the 90s or whatever, I've heard of that, but I don't know much about it. Okay.
Jeff?
A couple of questions I had. So when I read it, it was pretty, we spend a lot less time talking about $1 million purchases as a city sometimes, but I guess the question about $8,000 or $9,000 worth of project here, how much would a bridge cost or some alternative to this? Well, that would be a question I'd have before I'd feel comfortable voting yes or no on this. The second thing is, I guess I'm kind of curious a little bit to know what the status of the land directly south of this property is. Is there still some sort of a purchase? Is it on the market? I want to make sure that this is this is the only alternative before I'm comfortable with something like this.
Let me, with Jeff's help, try to answer a couple of those. My understanding is the property is still for sale. It
Okay.
has not been sold. It is still for sale. We are using the same path that was discussed and approved as a part of the plan with the council previously. And although you didn't ask this, I think it's important to note, we budgeted $16,000. You approved $16,000 in your budget to do this, and it's about $8,000, as you see here. I can't speak to what the future use is of that property, so I can't tell you in a whole universe whether there might be other alternatives. This is a very reasonable plan, a very cost-efficient plan that puts the trail where we plan to have it, that helps create a buffer between the pond and the other areas that you're impacting as well. Might we be able to buy additional property and make the trail go 200 feet south or something like that? That is possible. That isn't what we contemplated because, frankly, from a staff perspective, we didn't see that as being cost efficient. We thought that sticking to your original plan and finding the most cost efficient way to do it was most appropriate. And so that's what we've tried to do here.
I guess still from my perspective, I'd like to see some alternatives. If we have up to $16,000 allocated for, dipping this to the south of the wetland border or building a bridge across it, I'd rather see that happen first. And so I can't in good conscience vote in favor of this tonight.
Anyone else?
I will respectfully disagree. I, too, recognize the value of this property and the value of the ecological value. However, we're talking about a very, very small portion of property that is, I don't think we could find another cost-effective solution in this case if it were a more significant project or a different piece of land that was perhaps less impacted by regional development. That would be a different situation. But I think that the value of getting this project completed in a timely fashion and for the budget that we have means that it would, in this case, make sense to go forward.
I guess I would just say I respectfully disagree with this in the fact that this is an established wetland within the confines of the city of St. Peter, which allows to have a teachable moment for people to recognize and appreciate what wetland is in St. Peter.
Okay. On your question, there is a for sale sign on the corner of St. Julian and Old Minnesota on the southwest corner, which up until a little bit ago had a 5-point-some acres, which didn't match up, pending sale on it. Now that is gone. It just says 11-point-some acres for sale. So evidently it's all back on the market.
Mayor and members, if I can, from a procedural standpoint, if the council wants to pull this off the agenda, off the consent agenda, you certainly can. That just takes a request to do that, and then you vote at it later. If you want to continue to have it included as a part of the consent agenda, then you can just make a motion to approve the consent agenda and we move forward.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Any other questions or discussion? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zena.
Aye.
Councilmember Conley.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Brand.
For this one, I vote no.
Resolution passes with a vote of 6 and 1 nay. 6 in favor, 1 nay. Next up, we have unfinished business, and we have Jeff again, I believe, for the Veterans Memorial Park sidewalk improvement.
If I can, Mr. Mayor, Jeff and I will tag team just a little bit. There is information included in your packet starting on page 32. As you may recall, we asked you to reject bids previously, and we came back with a little bit different configuration, dividing this into a base bid and then additional alternatives, more alternatives than were provided before. The project was rebid, and you'll see in your packet on page 32 the tabulation for that. You also received separately within your packet, and I'll show it on the projector here, kind of a color-coded map that shows what the base is and where the alternates are for this. And so the recommendation that you're receiving from staff is that you enter into agreement with the lowest bidder, which is OMG Midwest, otherwise known as CHARD, or what we used to know as CHARD, to do the work of the base bid, and then alternates 1 and 2. The base bid and then alternates 1 and 2. and that provides for a total cost of the construction portion of the project of about $104,216. You may recall we budgeted roughly $100,000 for work here. I shouldn't say roughly. We budgeted $100,000 for this. And so we think this aligns appropriately. If the project runs a little bit less, because of course these projects are on a per unit basis, we'll reap that benefit. If it runs a little bit more, or at the 104, we'll try and shave other areas within your budget to make sure that your overall budget stays within check. You've allowed us that latitude in the past to try and make projects go. So really what we're looking to do, Jeff, if I can remember it correctly, is that you're looking to do the space, the base bid included the area around West Scarrow and the area that I would call west of the pool and south of the pool on Chatham. Then in addition, the two alternates include the area from behind the concession stand, so on Scarrow, down to the Kiwanis Pavilion, I guess.
The Lions, that's the Lions Pavilion.
Lions. Oh, Jeff, thank you. God, I'm sorry I got that wrong. I apologize to any Lions, of the Lions. And then from that Lions Pavilion up towards where the tennis courts are. So those would be the areas that would be contemplated for work this fall if you approve the $104,000 and accept the bid from OMG.
So the only thing we're not getting,
Fifth Street.
Fifth Street.
Yeah, you're not getting along Fifth Street. We did receive bids for that, and you'll see that alternate is being
Right.
alternate number 3 at about $38,000, $37,800. And so that would be presumably put on the list for next year
Right.
as we try and work through and utilize your budget. Again, overall, about a $300,000 overall project cost. You're trying to divide into about 3 years for sidewalks throughout the community, not just in this area, but throughout the community.
Susan?
Yeah. We had a bit of a conversation about this at our last meeting where we rejected the original bids. I disagree with the prioritization on this one. As I'm thinking back to our conversations about sidewalks, I feel that, and everyone is welcome to speak for themselves, I think a lot of our conversation about the decision to build more sidewalks in town was one specifically regarding pedestrian safety. And as I look at this map, alternates 1 and 2 provide convenience in the form of paved sidewalks in places where there are currently dirt trails going through the middle of the park. But there is absolutely no vehicle traffic around alternate 1 or alternate 2. They're smack in the middle of the park. Alternate 3 runs right along 5th Street. There's a considerable amount of traffic there, and the sidewalk or the hillside is sloped in such a way that it's very hard to walk in the grass, and people choose to walk in the road instead of on the grass. And so I just can't I understand there are some opportunities that might go away at some point as far as alternate 1 in particular. But as I look at this map, it looks to me like alternates 1 and 2 add up to approximately the same amount as alternate 3, which is 5th Street. And so I would highly encourage us to consider paying for the base project and incorporating alternate 3, which is 5th Street, because to me, that is perhaps the highest risk area for pedestrian safety. And so, there you go.
Jeff?
So I agree with what Ms. Carlin said about that. I really feel like if we're really going back and digging back into the year-long discussion we had about sidewalks, in particular last year, starting last year, was that, the discussion was, well, at least from my perspective, watching kids walk up on Scarrow Street to school every morning. There also are kids walking up on 5th Street as well. And so I think that's important to know, we're talking about safe routes to school, that sort of thing. It's incredibly difficult to walk on 5th Street when there's a tennis practice or a soccer practice or anything like that. When you've got 2 kids, a dog, myself and my wife walking in the road with people parked on both sides of 5th Street. Can't really walk on the grass for a lot of reasons. When we used to have a stroller, that was particularly difficult in the wintertime as well. And so I feel like from a pedestrian safety standpoint, 5th Street should have as much priority as Scarrow Street. Another thing I was thinking about is we had talked about spending a total of $300,000 on sidewalk. Whether we do it in 2 years or 3 years, I'm okay with spending it in 2 years. And so I would propose as a council, we look at tonight spending the money making the investment in our community and public safety in particular to purchase the base bid, alternative 1, alternative 2, and alternative 3. That'd be what I'd request in the form of an amendment to this tonight.
Steve?
On the last sentence of page 33, it talks about if alternates 1 and 2 are not completed this year, that due to the construction and access issues, that it would be more expensive. Can you explain why that would be, Jeff?
Yeah, very good points from both of you guys there. And the portion of sidewalk that's in alternate 1 and alternate 2, they're a little harder to get to, for instance. Alternate bid 3, from a construction standpoint, is a little easier simply because it's right near the roadway. If the contractor had a machine, which this one does, a concrete sidewalk machine with a form, they'd be able to basically pull it right down there and get it installed. So that's, by delaying that in the future, you probably get a reasonable price, but you're going to pay more regardless. By delaying alternate 1 and alternate 2, being they are confined to the park and there's not easy access there, the contractor is not able to back his trucks all the way up, or the concrete trucks all the way up to the forms, or the machine, whatever he's using. It's going to cost a little bit more to do that. So there's a trade-off. It's a money trade-off is what it ends up being.
So when you talk about a money trade-off, between those two projects, you're talking about $34,500 right now. What are you projecting it would be next year then?
It's hard to say. You see how well we did on the first time.
Well, you're the expert here, Jeff. You get paid that big money.
It's going to go up 3%. We'll give you a ballpark. I'm going to say it's going to
Yeah,
go
I
up
mean,
3%.
just don't throw something. I mean, Jeff is the expert here.
I'd say
that we
I'd say
relied
at
on
least,
the past.
at least 3%.
So,
It's
yeah.
going to be. It'll be more than that. It'll be more than 3%, just because it's confined to such a tight area.
Okay. And then, why would alternate 2 be an issue? I mean, it's city-owned property. Why can't they just drive a cement truck right on that grass? I mean, I see it all the time.
Yeah, they would likely do that for alternate 2, or a good
Yeah.
part of alternate 2, but
Okay.
alternate 1 would be the real challenge there.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Okay.
Roger?
I agree with, both council members about order of priority. I would sit more in the idea of let's just go ahead and do all the sidewalk and get it done. But my question is, the bids that we were asked to reject before and did reject, what was the total for all of it? Wasn't it like almost 300,000?
No, it was a little over 200, I believe.
Yeah.
And now we're at 143-ish?
141?
Why such a
142.
difference?
Yep.
I mean, that's percentage-wise, we're all over the place on this.
Yeah. I mean, you have a contractor, for instance, 3 different contractors bidding this job versus 1, plus the contractor that bid it originally maybe doesn't have some of the equipment that the contractor that's bidding it now has. As an example, the sidewalk machine. So it's a lot more efficient to do it that way.
But even the one that bid it before came down a lot.
Yeah, they did come down a little bit. Partially,
176?
I think partially that's due to scope change just slightly, because now as a city, we're going to be doing a little bit more work out there with some of our own forces rather than having the contractor do the work. So that's why everybody's went down.
Yeah, that's what Mr. Moulton pointed out the last time, that they weren't clear on how much the city was going to do.
And now they're more
scope.
clear.
Yes.
Yeah, we actually had a pre-bid meeting.
And Council, I know you've been asking us this a bunch of times. We cannot look into the minds of contractors and how they bid. It's just not a very fair question. With the amount of work that they have, where are their forces, when are they on vacation, when does the work need to be done? All of those things are factors when they bid this, and we just don't know what their mind is.
I understand that, but, you're asked to estimate. My job, I'm asked to estimate the same thing. And sometimes you're close and sometimes you're a little bit far. It happens.
And so last time the council rejected the bids based on the recommendation from staff to reject the bids, and now you have a better bid. Sounds like
Yeah.
a good win.
Well, it definitely is a good win.
Yeah.
I just kind of wondering why we're just all over. but it makes sense where they got some clarity. I'm with Mr. Brand, about just taking care of all the sidewalks and I'd like to hear others' thoughts on that.
I have some.
Susan?
I feel like at some point we came up with kind of a master list of the prioritized sidewalk projects around town. And I don't remember what level of detail we provided when we were doing that. But in my mind, when we're talking about Veterans Park, I was really thinking about Scarrow and Fifth Street as being the big needs. Some of the other projects on the list, I think, include Old Minnesota Avenue, maybe parts of 7th. I can't remember what else is on that list. But in my mind, all of probably the top 3 or 4 other projects on our list are all more important to me than these internal park sidewalks through the middle. And so given that we only have $300,000, theoretically, that's the number that we set for ourselves over a 3-year period. That can always change. But assuming we want to spend around $300,000, that's not going to get us everything on that list. And so I would rather spend about $100,000 on this project, on the exterior of this project this year, and then next year look at those other top priorities. If I had an extra $50,000 to spend this year, I probably wouldn't put it on alternates 1 and 2 in the park. I would probably direct it towards Old Minnesota Avenue, for instance, because to me, there's a much higher value to that. These going around the ball field and up to the skate rink are very nice and they're convenient, but they're not nearly as important to me. And I say that as someone who uses this park quite a lot. I'd rather see some of those other higher traffic roads get safer sidewalks first. So
Good points.
Anyone else?
Mayor, members, the resolution was contemplated to be base and alternate 1 and alternate 2. It's as simple as modifying the resolution when you move the resolution to provide for a change. So let us know what you want to do.
The resolution appears on page 36. Is there a motion for approval?
Move the resolution, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a second?
I'll second it, and I'll move to modify it to number 1 to add alternate 3. The expectation that we'll revisit next year on whether we drop to 60,000 or whether we stay at 100,000 and drop the third year to 60,000 or re-examine our priorities.
So you are saying
I'm
dropping 1 and 2?
No, I'm making a motion to add
3.
alternate 3
So
to number 1.
I'll second.
I need clarification on that. So you're saying do all of them?
Yes.
Okay,
All of them.
all right.
Base 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
The
Now I
whole
understand.
9 yards
Okay,
of
all
concrete.
right. All right. And Roger, you understood and seconded.
I understood and I seconded, and I understand Ms. Carlin's point, and I'd like us to see Old Minnesota move up on priority list for next year.
I've got
Yeah.
from a parliamentary procedure standpoint,
Sorry.
you have a motion and a second on the resolution. You have a motion to modify, to amend the resolution. You have a second to amend the resolution. You'd have to vote for the amendment first,
Right.
and then you could vote on the resolution as amended. So
Okay.
the first vote should be on the amendment, which is adding 3, or as Councilmember Kwame put it, the whole
Right.
9 yards.
The whole 9 yards. All right. Any other discussion? Everybody understand what we're voting for? Okay. Call the roll, please.
Voice vote.
It's a motion, sorry.
Yeah.
All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right. So that motion, so now we have a resolution. Is there a motion?
No. We just vote.
Roll call vote on the new resolution, which
Okay.
includes the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so that has been taken care of.
Yep.
Okay.
Which is good.
Any other discussion before we start? Call the roll, please.
Mayor Zeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Quimby,
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer,
Aye.
Councilmember Grant,
Aye.
Councilmember Paris,
Aye.
Councilmember Brand,
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Resolution as amended, as modified, passes with all the alternatives and the base. Correct?
Correct. That's correct. That's how staff is considering it. That's correct. That's what we'll do. That's how we'll draw the contract.
All right. That takes care of our unfinished business. Next up, we have new business, which is the Tax Increment Financing District, and we have Mr. Sweeney back with us.
Sure. Mayor and members of the council, we held a public hearing a little while ago on the creation of a TIF district and authorization of execution of a development agreement. In the meantime, I did have a brief discussion with the developer on the development agreement that we're authorizing execution of. And in section 6.1, there is a restriction on use. And we used to say multifamily rental housing facility was what we were restricting the use to. And the developer has indicated that he is amenable to changing that to guidance services, as is consistent with our zoning ordinance. And so our TIF assistance would be conditioned on the restriction on use of the property for guidance services. And so there's a resolution in your packet that provides for the adoption of the TIF district and the execution or authorization of execution of the development agreement. I would suggest that the development agreement be amended to reflect that change on the restrictions in use in order to properly put the council's performance measures in action. So more than happy to answer questions.
Anyone?
It's on page 13 of the development agreement. It's the
70.
first paragraph at the top, 6.1. And it's very common for us in our TIF agreements to include as restriction on use. We just incorrectly said multifamily rental housing. So we'd like to correct that and indicate guidance services.
Roger?
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
That's it?
That's it.
All right. Rick, would you please come up and just give us an overview of what guidance services are in this situation?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The project requires intensive services to ensure that people are going to go through their plans, their treatment plans. And so through a 3-year process, we've developed the program. We focus heavily on the supportive service that would be necessary so families succeed. And the concept really based on a housing first model. So people need to have stable housing, which really drove really the whole planning behind the Solace project. The other thing I would add...
May I interrupt very
Sure.
quickly? I'm so sorry. Could you maybe give about a 3-sentence overview of what the Solace project is, in case someone who's listening in hasn't heard of it at all yet, and what services we're
Certainly.
talking about?
Okay. The Solace project is a project that was put together through a strong community partnership that really began with Judge Kriebel from the drug court, indicating that she was having severe difficulties in housing people that were exiting and graduating from the drug court. So the issue was that people who have chemical dependency issues and generally a criminal background due to the drug use have a very difficult time competing in the housing market, particularly in a very tight market like St. Peter and the general area. Judge Kriebel was having, as I said, multiple failures that were resulting in huge costs to the criminal justice system. And as we began pulling the partners together, it became clear that it wasn't only the criminal justice system that was having extreme costs associated with this. People were failing, recycling back through. There was costs that were impacting the school district, primary health, public health, almost every part of the community. And so the major goals of this project are to have people succeed and to radically reduce the costs that are associated with this population. And in order to have people succeed, we really need to focus on intensive services.
And this project is really a one of a kind, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's being looked at as a national model, as a way of controlling costs and helping people succeed. And what's really unique about it is just the strong community partners that were involved with this from virtually every aspect of the community.
Thank you, Rick. Any other questions? Comments? I was going to do that. If anybody was wondering, I refer to him as Rick. that was Rick Gudeman from Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership.
I should have done that. Thank you.
That's okay, that's okay. All right, any other questions or comments? If not, the resolution approving the establishment of a tax increment financing district number 1-21 within the Municipal Development District number 1 and the adoption of the tax increment financing plan related to appears on pages 81 to 83. Is there a motion for approval?
With the addition of the guidance services, I'm very happy to make that
Thank you
motion.
for throwing that in.
I'll second that.
Any other questions, comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Clement?
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Paris?
Aye.
Councilmember Brand?
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin?
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Aye. Resolution passes. Thank you,
Thank you very
gentlemen.
much.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks.
Next up, we have the MnDOT Master Partnership Contract Renewal.
Mayor and members, this is a contract that you've had in place with the DOT through a number of cycles. I don't know if it's 2 or 3 or 4, but as the memo indicates, this is a renewal of that agreement, and it provides opportunity for sharing of professional and technical services. We swap things on routine roadway maintenance and construction administration. I would say that this agreement has benefited the city of St. Peter very well over the last number of years, and this is a renewal of that. You know, in the olden days, there was a handshake between foremen and how things would work, and we'd swap gravel for dirt and those types of things. DOT a number of years ago decided that there needed to be a more formal process for that, and this outlines that process. Again, this is renewal, so it is something you have entered into the past. This does not give staff the ability to go out and build a road someplace without your additional approval. These are generally considered for smaller maintenance items, and if we do swap out things on occasion, utilization of staff, equipment, maybe it's painting lines and stripes and those types of things. It also is used at times to help during an emergency. Maybe a flood or some activity, and we co-op on working to put up detour signs and those types of things. So that's really what it covers. The information is included in your packet, and the contract starts on page 86. I would mention that because of the rules within DOT, normally we'd see an agreement that is signed and work that is done under that contract that would be signed by the city administrator or by the mayor or by both. In this instance, it's done through the city engineer, and that has been the practice and is the practice with DOT. So that's not unusual for this. It would still have to go through the same internal process here that we would normally go through.
Questions, Roger?
Is there anything changing from the previous agreement?
No, there's really nothing significant changing other than the dates here, Roger, and ultimately who's going to sign in the agreement of this type, because some of the personnel have changed over time.
You say nothing significant. Is it just dates or is there anything else?
It's just dates. I don't believe there's any statutory citing changes. Those would have been incorporated, and frankly, Roger, if there was a site change, the content is the same. I didn't check the numbers against anything, Roger.
Any questions? If not, the resolution authorizing execution of Minnesota Department of Transportation Master Partnership Contract for years 2017 to 2022 appear on page 111. Is there a motion for approval?
So move, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other comments, questions? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Paris?
Aye.
Councilmember Brand?
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin?
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Clement?
Aye.
Resolution passes. Next up, we have a Jaguar Communications Agreement.
Mayor and members, this might be more accurately titled conduit lease. As you know, you have conduit in the ground that was installed after the tornado. It's been in the ground anywhere from now 18 years to 16 years, depending on where it was and what section of town. On occasion, we do install new conduit when we have new work going on. This agreement is really bartering with Jaguar Communications. They get to use a certain amount of your conduit, and by that I mean it's measured not only on lineal feet, but it's also the amount of space that they occupy within the conduit. And for that, they are giving you dark fiber, 12 strands of dark fiber. We believe that this is a worthwhile barter and provides opportunity for you to expand your system. We've talked about this in relation to the expansion of your AMI system and how it will be utilized. And there are lots of locations where in the future we imagine services being provided that would benefit by the opportunity to access that dark fiber, which from our standpoint, if we put it in, would be probably much more expensive than the cost of which you put in or the value of which the conduit is currently. So our recommendation is to approve this agreement, again, really leasing and bartering. There'd be no money really exchange hands, but they would get to use your conduit, and you get 12 strands of dark fiber that we can light up either now or into the future. I think the one thing that's important to note is that you do not get to lease that fiber to someone else. So as an example, we now enter this agreement, and Jim's television services comes into town, and he wants to light up some of that fiber. We could not lease that dark fiber to him. We can use it for our internal and public use, not for competitive use, as is described in the agreement.
Questions, Steve?
There's two words in here that kind of amply describe how I feel. First of all, I'm in the dark and I want to be lit up. And that is, why do we always reference 12 strands? I mean, I don't understand that. Do we need an engineer to explain that to me?
I'm not sure who can explain to you, but let me give it a shot.
Okay.
Generally, 12 is the number that is bundled together. It's like buying a 12-pack of pop or a 12-pack of beer.
I don't drink beer, so that's...
Has it's installed, has it's purchased, has the company that's going to use the fiber. Generally, 12 strands is the number of strands that it comes in.
So that's in the tube that it's in, you know, the conduit?
How it's bound together.
Okay. So in some cases, if there's a high demand, is it more than 12?
So as Jaguar puts in fiber here, they probably are putting in 36 strands. They're going to utilize now or into the future 24 of those, and you're getting 12. But they come in bundles of 12, essentially.
Okay.
John?
And this fiber is going to help with our AMI system, which has something to do, I think, with meters.
Which has a lot to do with meters. This is your automated meter system that you've talked about and approved to go off of pilot onto regular utilization. We also use fiber in a number of other ways within the city. We use it for SCADA, which is supervised control and data acquisition systems. So what happens is we have computers that are in a remote spot checking on a well. And so it talks to a big computer down at Public Works and it says, you need some more water? Tell me when to turn on. And we might use this fiber to transport the signal to tell that pump, that well, to produce water for the water tower. We use this in a number of different ways. We used dark fiber to help install your phone system within various locations within your city, as an example. And there are many others, but those are probably two readily available, easy ones to explain.
Someone weird, Rod?
That was my question as well, right? Why does this have value to us of $12,000?
For all those purposes and many more.
Right,
Um,
Mr. Kwame. you know.
Yeah, it's your computers, it's your systems, it's all those things. It's data acquisition that we would utilize into the future. There's value to us in that and having ready access to it.
Anyone else? The resolution authorizing execution of the networking sharing agreement between Jaguar Communications, Inc. and the City of St. Peter appears on page 123. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Brand.
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zeno.
Aye.
Councilmember Coleman.
Aye.
Councilmember Frey.
Aye.
Resolution passes. Next up, we have municipal lot number 5 parking, loading, unloading zone requests.
Mayor and members, Russ is here to describe this one.
Yeah, Mayor and the City Council, Daniel Dinsmore is repurposing, well, Building Good Communities is repurposing the Armory at 419 South Minnesota into the Capitol Room Event Center. At the previous meeting, you provided partial funding through a loan to Building Good Communities to partially finance the installation of a fire suppression system. At this time, the operator of the Capitol Room, Daniel Dinsmore, has made 2 requests. The first one is a requirement of his conditional use permit, which was provided by the Board of Zoning Appeals and Adjustments. And Mr. Dinsmore was obligated to request a 35-foot loading and unloading zone in front of the old armory at such time as he would have public events. The concern of the Planning Commission had been that during events, if there are cars parked along the curb line, then that the public will actually stop in the travelable lanes of 169 and disembark their passengers then, certainly creating a hazard in an unsafe condition. The other request from Mr. Dinsmore would be to re-sign municipal parking lot number 5. At this point, it is signed and prohibits parking from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. The request would be to re-sign it to provide 24-hour parking, as is in the majority of the other municipal lots downtown. There are 2 resolutions that are prepared. The first one does provide the loading and unloading zone, and that is on page 127. And Mr. Mayor, I'd answer any questions that you or members of the council might have.
Questions? John?
The resolution that's been prepared says it's the responsibility of the owner, Mr. Dinsmore, to put the signs out, or to get the sign, make the signs, put the signs out beforehand and pick the signs up afterwards, store them himself. But I thought we had also talked about it was his responsibility to supervise what was going on in the loading zone, so the traffic kept moving. And that's not mentioned.
If you would like to include it, we can certainly include it. We're not against that, John. It's an oversight on my part.
I'm not sure how to word it.
If you would give us the latitude, I think you provided the key words, which include supervised use of the loading zone.
Jeff?
I believe that was the recommendation of Chief Peters if this were to go through too, so it's kind of mentioned in there,
It is.
but it wasn't specifically
Yep.
discussed. A question I had, the more I think about it, so like, for instance, another business in downtown is the Embassy. Sometimes the truck shows up and they park on the side street. Sometimes the truck pulls up and they pull in the alley. Sometimes the truck pulls up and they park right on 169. I've never seen any accidents. I've never heard of any accidents, but everything seems to come and go fairly easily when that's parked there. So from the standpoint of loading and unloading, what makes this different?
What makes this different is you'll have hundreds of people trying to attend and appear at the location at the same time in anticipation of a dance or in anticipation of a reunion. The loading and unloading of those food trucks usually occur during the daytime hours. It happens at Herbert and Gerbert's. It happens at all of them, every one of them.
Right.
So, but I think in this case, Councilman Brandt, it is that the occupancy of the total building is about 360 people. Mm-hmm. And so, the concern had been that when they are drawing a crowd, when you are bringing hundreds and hundreds of people to a specific event, and after giving it thought, I agree wholeheartedly with the Planning Commission that I can envision it because I can just see it happening. People stopping in the northbound lane to 169 as the 3 passengers get out. So it was seen by the Planning Commission, I believe, as a reasonable alternative. Certainly discussed at the workshop last week, and bringing forward you with the Planning Commission and what we thought the core of the discussion was at the workshop.
I have go ahead.
One other question too. An alternative to this, I was thinking about, since the Planning and Zoning Commission, why don't we just make this a no parking, so people can't park? That would deter people from parking in 169 as well.
Well, I think the general thought is that the parking would be available when they're not having an event.
Yeah, so we could put up a sign saying no parking from 5 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the morning.
But on weekends, you would probably have a wedding or wedding reception that started in the afternoon. The specific hours wouldn't fit for a lot of things that are going to be going on.
Roger?
I mean, I'm okay with, I guess, what we're discussing, but I guess, aren't most people going to just use parking lot number 5 and just walk into the event? I mean, I don't see,
Don't know.
isn't that what most people do? You park and you go in.
It's raining, it's snowing.
My mother would tell me a gentleman should drop off his guest at the door and
Susan?
then go park the car.
I think the answer to Roger's question, and maybe part of the difference that Jeff was asking about, is I think we see a different type of use in this facility. So whereas with the embassy, for instance, there's a professional driver, and there's usually only one of them. There's usually just one delivery truck at a time. Here we might have a situation where you have multiple cars full of private citizens who might be running late for a really important event, and you've got individuals who are all dressed up and don't want to have to walk too far in their high heels or whatever the case may be. And so they're trying to cut some corners and trying to get into the building as quickly as possible in all sorts of weather conditions. And you also probably have people who are in a hurry because they're running a little bit late. And so all those things tied together lead to situations where people are not driving at their very best capabilities. And while it's one thing to put that on those individuals and say that they should be responsible drivers, part of it too is to protect all of the other traffic from people who might not be using their very best judgment, such as stopping in the lanes. I would trust that professional delivery drivers know better than to stop right on the highway, but somebody who's running late for their nephew's wedding might not be using the same rational thought, and they might make some poor traffic decisions.
Well, there you have, you have one driver with the, now here you have multiple, maybe 100 people, whatever, 100 cars, whatever it is. I'm sorry, Susie, do you have
No,
more?
that was all I had to say.
I have something I'd like for us to consider if people have your packets in front of you, page 126. We're talking about building 419. These people also own, he doesn't run this part of it, not yet anyway, or whatever, 429. Instead of using Minnesota Avenue, how about using the northern part of Mulberry? It adds just a few feet to their walking, but if somebody's going to walk, you know, and using that as a drop-off on the northern part, northwest part of that street where it goes into Minnesota Avenue. There's sidewalks there, there's access there. Boy, I just have a real fear of like I say, especially in inclement weather on Minnesota Avenue, if that's the situation, you know, they're talking Christmas parties, whatever the case may be. Well, here you're out of the way, you can have all the room you want, you already own that property too. So why not use that? As, to me, it's a lot safer. Just a thought. Yeah.
I'm not gonna vote for it,
Yeah. That I had a thought, that's what you're agreeing with?
I think that's a reasonable spot and probably a little bit safer. My only concern would be with people who are in such a rush that they're just going to park right in front of the building, no matter what we try to encourage them to do otherwise.
Well, not if there's no place to park.
And would you suggest getting rid of
Not
parking
having
lot?
the parking in the front,
Oh.
or the drop-off zone in the front. Not have two of them.
Right.
Just
No,
have one.
I'm just concerned that people will still just choose to
Mm.
park there anyhow because they don't make good choices when they're in a rush.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you that Mulberry would be a little bit safer. And if we saw a stacking situation where you have 3 vehicles who all want to drop off passengers, there probably wouldn't be a lot of traffic pulling up behind them on Mulberry, whereas there would be on 169. So
Exactly.
that I could be convinced.
Just adds a few feet.
But if there's
Yeah.
parking in front of the building, regular parking,
Mhm.
then there's people gonna be stopping in that outside northbound lane out in the traffic to let people out.
I don't know.
I think they will.
Mayor and members, if I can, even if you take action tonight in some way, this doesn't mean that it can't change in the future. We're looking for an eloquent solution to something that we really haven't experienced yet, but we want to be ahead of it. So whatever we do, whatever you tell us you want to have happen, we'll make sure we're watching for a little bit and certainly consulting with the building owner, user, renter about what might be a better solution depending on what we see and how people act.
Okay. Susie?
I'd make a motion to approve the resolution that's presented, but then also just to ask city staff to monitor the situation and report back to us maybe at the start of the new year to see if this is working or not. But I think either way, whether it is or not, we should revisit it in a few months' time. So that was the long-winded motion for approval.
Well, I haven't opened the floor yet for motions.
I'm
so-
sorry.
So we're not to that point yet. Is there any other discussion? Okay, so now Susie, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I will make the motion for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other questions? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Paris?
Aye.
Councilmember Brand?
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin?
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Nay.
Councilmember Conlon?
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Resolution passes by 6-1. Next up, we have the other part of this request, and Todd, you want to tell us about that one?
Russ had described this earlier. This relates to the changing of signage and allowance for parking within parking lot number 5. So instead of it being restricted between the hours of, what was it, Russ?
2 a.m. to 6 a.m.
It would now be available for 24-hour parking. Again, in tune with the majority of your other municipal parking lots.
Jeff?
Which ones aren't?
City Hall would be the only one that would remain then.
And if I could, community center.
Oh.
I generally categorize the community center, it's not in the central business district, so we look at that differently. Some of your other parking lots, for example, at Galt Park, Jefferson Fields aren't signed. But you do have an ordinance that says cars got to move every 24 hours.
Sure.
And so if we do get complaints, we act on those complaints.
Okay.
So does that mean these lots get used for snow emergencies?
Some of the lots do get used for snow emergencies, John.
Appropriately, legally?
I think appropriately and legally, and it's something that we promote not only on your website, but we even have flyers that talk about how to respond where folks can park.
Jeff?
And might I add, I've noticed that Russ has been kind enough to go downtown and tell everybody that this is no emergency. I've appreciated that in the past as well.
Any other questions or comments? If not, the resolution removing certain parking restrictions in municipal parking lot number 5 appears on page 129. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second?
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Brand?
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin?
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Conlon?
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Paris?
Aye.
Resolution passes. Next up, we have a request for Rock Bend Folk Festival assistance.
Mayor and members, they're hoping to have the Folk Festival and utilize the park from the 5th through the 11th. Certainly, all of those days are not days that the Folk Festival is on. Some of the days are set up and some of the days are takedown, and so typically that Saturday and Sunday are the prime days for the Rock Bend Folk Festival. There's nothing that's significantly different than what you approved previously within this. I know someone will ask, well, what about the pavilion? What's happening with the pavilion? I have talked with John Gainey, who I believe is the chair or the president of the Rock Bend Folk Festival Committee about that, and there's no timeline set. You haven't requested bids or sought bids or a lot of things. So for this year, certainly we're still in the same mode as you've been over the last 20 plus years. So the information is included in your packet based on their request, which starts on page 132, and the resolution starts on page 134.
Resolution authorizing city assistance for Rock Bend Folk Festival, as Todd said, 134 and 135. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question. I guess how expensive or how inexpensive would it be to have some sort of a parking permit for folks that are parking inside of our public parks that would designate whether or not they're allowed to be in the park, to give authorization for folks to park their automobiles in our public spaces?
I don't know. I think that it would be as expensive as it takes the personnel to watch the gate and to kind of patrol it. So a few $100s over the course of that weekend when the festival is ongoing, not the setup or the takedown time, but when the festival is ongoing. We have talked in the past about limiting or providing only X number of passes, and then that kind of restricts. It does mean that folks might be able to leave and hand you the pass and you come back in so that folks can come in and out, again, using some terminology that I used just a little bit ago. I don't know that I have an eloquent solution to some of the challenges we have there, but certainly open to ideas that the council might have, how you want to address it.
Another thing I've noticed is on a Saturday, last Saturday actually, I saw some folks parked inside of Veterans Park next to the ice rink. And I thought that was a little interesting that there would be 2 gold vans parked in the park on a Saturday. I didn't know what that was in reference to, if they were allowed to do that, but in my mind, that kind of, they're
Sure.
both together. If people are using their private vehicles to park in our public parks, I'd like there to be some formal authorization for them to do so, because not only are they, you know, tramping down our grass, they could also be leaking some fluids on our park.
Sure.
Those are costs that have to be actualized from our parks workers and parks department budgets. And so I just want to make sure that we're clearly assigning folks the responsibilities to be in that park at that time.
I've seen those vehicles there, and maybe not those vehicles there multiple times down there.
Let me divide the discussion into maybe 3 parts if I can. First, starting with the last, which was, I think you were talking about Veterans Field.
Yes.
Veterans Field, the area that is the lower hockey rink, does host remote control car events. And so oftentimes they're in there, and I can't tell you whether it's an extended period of time or not, but dropping off ramps and other equipment that's utilized down there. But we could certainly put in a policy. Now, going to the broader question, we can certainly try and draft a policy for the council to review and try and enforce it across one or all of your parks if you would like. As folks reserve those parks, there's certainly often an opportunity to discuss the ability to drive into the park to drop off certain types of equipment. I will say that Rock Bend has been more cooperative than other users of your park relative to keeping the number of vehicles down. At least that's my perspective, and I believe that the police chief would share that perspective. So again, we can put together a policy if you want and manage that in a more controlled fashion if you wish.
Yeah, I just assumed they were there for an event or something like that, but I don't know. You know, I didn't go down and ask them what they were doing.
Yeah, I was actually down there playing tennis on one of those really hot Saturdays, and so they were dropping off equipment within that lower rink for the RC competition that was going on there.
Cool.
But if the council does want a policy, just let me know, and we can start to do something and talk about it at some future meeting, if that's something that you're interested. And we have, over the past year or so, used parks staff to help manage that gate more appropriately. And again, Rock Bend has been more controlled in reducing the number of vehicles that are in Minnesota Square Park, if we're just discussing Minnesota Square Park.
Okay. Any other questions? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zinn.
Aye.
Councilmember Klum.
Aye.
Councilmember Fraser.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Hale.
Aye.
Councilmember Brand.
Aye.
Resolution passes. Last item is a business license application. Todd.
Mayor and members, there's information in your packet. This primarily relates to the users, the renters of the Capitol Room, and provides for on-sale liquor, Sunday liquor, and soft drink licensing. We found nothing in the background check that would prohibit them from having any of those licenses. The resolution's in your packet, on the end of your packet on page 137.
Any questions? Steve?
Todd, do the other establishments in the community that want to do on sale because of the statutory change, do they have to apply, or is that just an automatic because we voted for it? The last meeting that we went through.
I'm sorry, Steve, I'm
That
not
was
sure
the
what you're
Sunday
asking.
liquor. You know, the Sunday liquor on sale and the other,
Okay.
or off sale, I should say, is that automatic because we voted for it two weeks ago?
If they have an off-sale license currently, prior, let me be clear, prior to the 1st of July, then the modification that you made would apply to them.
Okay.
Just to be clear, this application does not include an off-sale
Right,
request.
I understand that.
Okay.
It was an aside.
Okay.
Any other questions? The resolution approving the 3 licenses appears on page 137. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions? Call the roll, please.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Brand.
Aye.
Councilmember Cardinal.
Aye.
Resolution passes. That concludes our new business. Next up, we have reports, and I have nothing to add.
I have a couple of quick ones, if I may, Mr. Mayor, a couple that are listed on this, and just a few others that I'll just hit on quick. First of all, City Council filing period starts Tuesday, August 1st through Tuesday, August 15th, during regular hours at the City Administrator's Office, which is generally from 8 to noon and 1 to 5. It's $5, and then you have to fill out the application. And so we encourage all folks who are interested in being on the City Council or Mayor to come on in during that time, August 1st to August 15th. I also want to mention we've had a number of calls to City Hall and Police Department about door-to-door salespeople, and you have rules related to that within the community. And unless they have a permit, they can't go door-to-door unless they were invited by you. So let me draw the distinction in that. If you have someone that you talked to at the county fair and said, please stop by my door, I want to talk to you, that's cool. They don't need an additional permit to do that. But if they're just cold calling and coming through, then they need an additional permit, and we do background checks related to that. Ask to see the permit. We give them a permit, and so ask to see that permit. If you have a concern, please feel free to give us a call or call the police department, and we will gladly help with asking them to leave your doorstep if that's what's necessary.
Does your $5 filing fee cover a permit to be able to go door to door?
Distribution of political material in that way is exempted from the rule. So I don't know if we consider that like maybe it is. It's kind of a sense. Let me give you just 3 other quick ones. First of all, we have a goal setting session that'll be coming up. And so I wanted to mention that from about 3 o'clock until 9:30. And I wanted to also mention Night to Unite is August 1st down at Jefferson. At Veterans Field near the pool. And that's hosted again at Veterans near the pool. And that's hosted by the St. Peter Police Department and the Rec Department and a number of other sponsors who really contributed a lot. And it's a really cool event for folks. There's lots of activities. There's food. You get to crawl around a fire truck and an ambulance and a squad car and all those kinds of things. It's really a wonderful.
Free admission to the pool, door prizes.
You bet. Find out more on the hot sheet. There's lots of cool stuff that goes on with that. And then I also want to mention that we have a solar subscription program that you can find information about within the city's website and on our last video blog and within the hot sheet. So if you're interested in owning a little piece of that sun, a solar subscription, now's a great time to sign up. It's been sunny lately. And so now's a wonderful time to think about it and sign up. So, Mr. Mayor, that's all I have.
Anyone else have anything to add? Steve?
I just have a concern. 4 years ago, was the filing fee $2?
Yes.
So I'm just concerned that Mr. Paris might be, if he decides to run, it could be an issue.
Might deter me.
I can't speak to that one, Steve, other than a statutory change.
Okay, all right.
I got some
It's a good
quarters in my
value, just to
ashtray
say
in the
it.
car, Roger, if you need. So. Anyone else?
It is.
If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.
There was a very. $5.